So yesterday we looked at simply factoring a binomial which had two terms. Now today we're going to learn a new method to factor trinomials. Just keep in mind the prefix tri means three, so we're going to be looking at polynomials with three terms in them. So your objective today is pretty basic. I will be able to factor trinomials. Once you have that written down, go ahead and look at our first set of directions. We do need to remember what standard form is. It is ax squared plus bx plus c. An example of what that might look like is 2x squared plus 4x plus 7. A, b, and c are numbers. So when we have a trinomial in this form, there is a method we're going to use to factor it. So here are the steps we're going to use. Go ahead and take a moment to write these down while I walk through it, and I promise they will make sense as soon as we start applying them and practicing them. The first thing you're going to do is multiply a times c, and whatever that number is, you're going to put it on the top of the x. So for example, if we had x squared plus x minus 3, so I'm going to make that a plus 2x. So if we had x squared plus 2x minus 3, we would multiply a times c. Well, a is the coefficient on the x squared. This is my a. My c is negative 3. So if I multiply 1 times negative 3, I will get negative 3. Then I'm going to find the factors of ac that add to b. So ignore this x, do not write the x, just write the b. Well, the b is 2. So that number goes in the bottom of the x. Our goal will then be step 3 to rewrite the equation with bx as factors of a times c. We will then find the GCF of each side and divide out the GCF. We will make sure our parentheses match. We will then factor out the common factor and write our answer. Once you have those directions written down, go ahead and move on. But take a moment and pause it to make sure you get your steps. So here's our first example. I'm going to show you two different ways to decide how to factor it. Our ultimate goal is to get the two binomials that if we were to distribute, that would get us back to the original starting trinomial, x squared plus 7x plus 12. It's like we're going to undo the distribution. We need to find out what two binomials multiply together to equal the x squared plus 7x plus 12. There are two ways to solve it, using the same steps, just different ways to show your work. The first one is we write down whatever a times c is, and that answer goes here, and the b number goes right there. So let's look at our trinomial, x squared plus 7x plus 12. Remember that 1 is what's attached to the x squared, that's your a, b is your 7, and c is your 12. So I need to find two numbers that are going to multiply to a times c. Well, a is 1, c is 12, 1 times 12 is 12. And the two numbers that I pick, I need to add up to 7. So they need to add to 7, because that is our b number. So let's think about two numbers that multiply to 12. We could do 1 times 12, we could do 2 times 6, and we could do 3 times 4. There are three different ways to multiply to 12. But only one pair of those numbers will add to 7. Hoping you saw 3 and 4. So I'm going to pick the factors 3 and 4. The way I know they're correct is 3 times 4 is 12, and 3 plus 4 is 7. So my factors are simply x and a positive 3, x and a positive 4. If I were to multiply that out, x times x is x squared, x times 4 is 4x, plus 3x is our 7x, 3 times 4 is 12. So the factors of x plus 3 times x plus 4 is the factored version of our trinomial. Now, doing that exact same problem, this is the way I was taught, and it's just a little less work, but you can decide what makes more sense. We need two numbers that multiply to a times c. So I need two numbers that multiply to 1 times 12, which is 12. I need two numbers that add to b, which is 7. It's the same idea as the x, we're just not drawing the x. Well, the two numbers that will multiply to 12 that add to 7 are 3 and 4. 3 times 4 is 12. 3 plus 4 is 7. So I know for a fact 3 and 4 are correct. So I could rewrite the answer again as x plus 3 times x plus 4. I'd like you to take a moment and just kind of get a feel. Do you want to be a person who shows their work using the x? Or do you like simply writing out the two statements? Take a moment and think about which type of personality you are. So let's look at the next one. One more time, I will walk you through both methods, and then hopefully you will have an idea of which kind of person you are. In the top part of the x is your a times c. So I'm going to do 1 times 44, which is 44. So I need two numbers that multiply to 44. The same two numbers must add to b, which is 15. So two numbers that multiply to 44. Well, 1 times 44, 2 times 22, and 4 times 11. Can you think of a pair that would add to 15? I'm hoping you saw that 4 plus 11 is 15, and 4 times 11 is 44. So our answer is simply x and a positive 4 times x and a positive 11. That's it. Let's prove it that it works the other way. I need two numbers that multiply to a times c, which is 44. The same two numbers must add to b, which is 15. I know 4 times 11 is 44, and I also know that those same exact two numbers, 4 plus 11 is 15. It must be the same two numbers in order to work. Now keep in mind, you could have said 11 and then 4, so you could have written your answer as x plus 11 times x plus 4. Order does not matter according to the commutative property of multiplication. Both answers are the same. So how are you feeling? Do you think you're more of the organizing through an x or simply by writing the two statements? Based on what you just said, I would like you to try this one your way. Pause the video and then come back and check yourself when you're done. No matter which method you use, did you find the two factors are x plus 4 and x minus 9? Were you careful and watch your signs? They had to multiply to a negative 36, which means one had to be positive, one had to be negative. And they had to add to a negative 5. So the fact that the answer had to add to a negative number, that means my larger number had to have the negative sign. That is the only way to add to the negative 5. Let's look at our next one. Again, I'm going to pause and I want you to come back and see how you did. Were you able to find that the numbers negative 2 and negative 8, a negative times a negative does equal the positive 16. A negative 2 plus a negative 8 equals the negative 10 when we add. So our two factors both have a minus sign this time. So x minus 2 times x minus 8. This one is a little different. You will notice it's a binomial because there's only two terms. What I'd like you to visualize is that since we have no x's in the middle, we can visualize 0x. There are no x's to the first power. So we need to find two numbers that multiply to negative 1 that add to 0. Well, the only way to multiply to 1 is 1 times 1, and in order to add to 0, 1 would have to be positive and 1 would have to be negative. 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. 1 plus negative 1 is 0. So our factors are simply x and a positive 1, x and a negative 1. So how does that feel, having to put in a 0x in the middle, which just means the two numbers that we pick need to add to 0, which means they must be opposites. They must be the same number, 1 and 1, but one's positive and one's negative. Here's another one. I'd like you to take a moment and put the 0x in the middle, and then ask yourself, what two numbers can multiply to negative 144 that can also add to 0? Well, it has to be the same number. One has to be positive and one has to be negative. 12 times 12 is 144, but in order to add to 0, one of the 12s must be negative. That makes sense now. 12 times negative 12 is negative 144. 12 plus negative 12 is 0. So our two factors are x and a positive 12 and then x and a minus 12. We will learn a shortcut coming up in a few more lessons, but for right now, I would like you to visualize the 0x in the middle. Let's take what we've learned now and apply it to a somewhat real-life situation. Area of a rectangle is x squared plus 6x plus 5. We know one of the dimensions is x plus 1. The question is, what is the other dimension? So here's what we need to find out. We need two numbers that multiply to the 5, which is our C. Those same two numbers need to add to 6. That is our B. Well, the two numbers that multiply to 5, 1 and 5, also add to 6. That means the two factors need to be 1 and 5. Well, we already have the 1, so guess what this one is? It would be the 5. So the length of the rectangle is represented as x plus 5. That's it. That's as easy as that question was. It was not meant to be too difficult. If you're unsure of how we did that, take a minute and go back. If you are the X person, you're finding two numbers that multiply to 5 that add to 6. Well, the only way to multiply to 5, since it's prime, is 1 and 5. And 1 plus 5 does equal 6. So we need our factors to be x plus 1 and x plus 5. And in our picture, we were already given the x plus 1, so that means the other dimension must be x plus 5. Once you're okay with that, you are ready to begin your assignment. So go ahead and pause your video.